The cantina's air was thick with smoke and the bitter smell of Nexorian ale. Station Game 7 orbited the outer rim of contested space, a place where warriors came to drink away their memories and young soldiers came to find their courage. Metal walls vibrated with the low hum of the station's engines. Mixing with the clatter of glasses and rough voices speaking in a dozen alien tongues, Veltar sat alone at a corner table, his massive frame hunched over a half-empty bottle of liquid that glowed faintly blue in the dim light. His 6 arms, each as thick as a human torso, rested on the scarred metal surface. Every inch of his purple-scaled hide told a story of violence. Plasma burns created twisted patterns across his shoulders. Blade marks ran in neat lines down his forearms. But it was his face that drew the most attention, or rather, what was missing from it. Where his left eye should have been, a jagged scar ran from his forehead to his jaw, the flesh around it pale and twisted. The veteran had been sitting there for 3 hours, nursing his drink and watching the young soldiers celebrate their upcoming deployment. They were fresh from the academy, their scales still bright with youth, their armor still unmarked by real combat. They laughed too loud and boasted too much, the way all young warriors did before they learned what war really meant. "I heard the humans surrendered 3 colonies last month," one recruit said, his voice carrying across the cantina. His name was Zektar, barely 20 cycles old, with the kind of confidence that only came from never having been shot at. Command says this deployment will be more like a cleanup operation than a real battle. His companion, a female named Yexera, nodded eagerly. "My instructor said humans are basically walking targets. They're so fragile that our standard plasma rifles can take down 5 or 6 of them with one shot." The group erupted in laughter. Another recruit, this one with fresh lieutenant's stripes on his armor, raised his glass. "2 easy victories and quick promotions," he declared. "Just soft human flesh meeting hard Nexorian steel." Zektar added, and the young soldiers cheered. Veltar's mandibles clicked once, a sound like breaking glass that cut through their celebration. The noise was quiet, but something about it made the recruits fall silent. They turned to look at the scarred veteran, and for a moment, the cantina seemed to hold its breath. "You think humans are weak?" Veltar asked, his voice carrying the weight of old wounds and older regrets. His remaining eye fixed on Zektar, and the young soldier suddenly felt very small. "Well, I mean, ... Zektar started, then stopped. There was something in the veteran's gaze that made his throat dry. "Everyone knows they're primitive, right? No natural armor, no claws, no venom glands. They don't even have proper scales." Veltar slowly reached for his bottle, his movements deliberate and careful. Each of his 6 arms had been broken at least once, and they didn't bend quite right anymore. "Primitive," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Is that what they're teaching you hatchlings these days?" The lieutenant stepped forward, trying to maintain his authority. "Sir, with respect, the tactical briefings clearly state that human forces are technologically inferior. Their weapons are less advanced, their armor is weaker, and their military doctrine is outdated by at least 50 cycles." Veltar's mandibles clicked again. But this time it sounded almost like laughter, if laughter could carry the echo of screams and the smell of burning flesh. "Sit down, hatchling," he said, gesturing to the empty chairs around his table. "Of you. Let me tell you about the Kepler campaign, and why half my unit never came home." The recruits exchanged glances. The smart ones sat down immediately. The others followed after a moment's hesitation, drawn by something in the veteran's voice that promised truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Veltar drained his glass in one long pull, then set it down with a sound like a funeral bell. The cantina's noise seemed to fade away, as if the station itself was leaning in to listen. Even the bartender, a grizzled centaurian with 3 heads, had stopped polishing glasses to pay attention. "It was 15 cycles ago," Veltar began, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the room. "I was younger then, stupider. I thought my armor made me invincible, and my weapons made me a god. I thought humans were nothing but soft meat waiting to be carved." He touched the scar where his eye had been, and his remaining eye grew distant, looking not at the recruits, but at something far away and long ago. I learned different. We all did. It's those of us who lived long enough to learn anyway. The recruits leaned forward despite themselves, drawn into the veterans' gravity like ships falling toward a black hole. They had come to the cantina looking for one last night of fun before deployment. Instead, they had found something else entirely, a glimpse into the darkness that waited for them in human space, and the terrible price of underestimating the enemy who refused to die quietly. Veltar's claws scraped against the metal table as memories flooded back. The sound made the recruits flinch, but the veteran didn't notice. He was 15 cycles in the past, standing on the ramp of a Nexorian assault ship as it descended through the atmosphere of Kepler 186F. The briefing made it sound like a vacation, he said, his voice carrying the bitter taste of old lies. Intelligence reported a small mining colony, maybe 300 humans, they said. Basic defensive positions. Outdated equipment. Command told us we'd be home in time for the victory feast. The veteran's remaining eye stared into his empty glass as if he could see the past reflected in its bottom. Our fleet was massive. 12 dreadnoughts, 40 assault cruisers, and enough troops to conquer a small moon. The 3rd Assault Division alone had over 2,000 warriors. We felt like gods descending from the stars. Zektar leaned forward, his young face eager despite the growing tension. What happened when you landed? Nothing, Veltar said simply. That was the first sign something was wrong. We landed in perfect formation under cover of darkness. Our sensors showed no movement, no heat signatures, no energy readings. The colony looked completely abandoned. He picked up his bottle and poured another drink, his movements slow and deliberate. I was a squad leader then. 12 good warriors under my command. All of them veterans of the Centauri Wars. We'd fought together for 5 cycles, trusted each other with our lives. I thought we were ready for anything. The cantina had grown quieter around them. Other soldiers and spacers had stopped their own conversations to listen. War stories had a way of drawing crowds, especially stories that started with confident armies and ended with scarred veterans drinking alone. We moved through the colony streets in perfect formation, Veltar continued. Every building was dark. Every window was empty. Our thermal scanners showed nothing. Even the power grid was shut down. It was like the humans had just vanished into thin air. He touched the scar on his face again, a habit he'd developed over the years. That's when Kethmel started getting nervous. He was my sergeant, toughest warrior I'd ever served with. He'd fought in the Void Wars, survived the Battle of Proxima Station, earned more medals than I could count. But something about those empty buildings made his scales turn pale. The lieutenant recruit interrupted. But if the colony was empty, why didn't you just secure it and move on? Veltar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement, because the colony wasn't empty. Hatchling. We just couldn't see where they were hiding. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean closer. We were checking the 3rd building when the first explosion hit, not from some human position we could see and target. It's from right under our feet. The street itself exploded upward, swallowing 3 of my warriors in fire and metal. His claws dug into the table, leaving small scratches in the metal. But we were still trying to figure out what happened. The 2nd bomb went off. Then the 3rd. The humans had turned their entire colony into one giant trap. Every street, every building, every piece of ground we walked on was rigged to kill us. Yexura shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But surely you could track them with your equipment. Track what? Veltar asked, his voice sharp with old frustration. Shadows. Ghosts. The humans moved through their colony like they were part of it. They knew every tunnel, every pipe, every maintenance shaft. We stumbled around in the open. They watched us from places we didn't even know existed. He drained his glass again, the liquid burning down his throat like liquid fire. That's when I first saw her, Yuna. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, maybe 90 pounds, soaking wet. No armor, no visible weapons, just work clothes and a tool belt. The veterans I grew distant, seeing not the cantina, but a darkened street on a world far away. She appeared at the end of the street like a ghost. Kethmal saw her first, started to raise his plasma rifle. Professional soldier, perfect training, decades of combat experience. Should have been an easy kill. Veltar's voice grew quiet, forcing the recruits to strain to hear. But Yuna moved like water. It's like smoke.
Right.
By the time Kethmal's finger found the trigger, she was already gone. Vanished into a ventilation grate that looked too small for a child, let alone a grown human. Then the mining laser cut through his chest. The words hit the table like a physical blow. The recruits stared at the veteran in shock. Industrial equipment, Veltar explained, his voice carrying the weight of disbelief even after all these years. Not a military weapon, just a tool for cutting through rock and metal. But in human hands, it became something else entirely. The beam sliced through Kethmal's armor like it was made of paper. 20 years of combat experience ended by a maintenance worker with a mining tool. He looked at each recruit in turn, his scarred face grim. That was just the beginning. Over the next 6 hours, Yuna killed 16 of my soldiers. 16 trained Nexorian warriors, each one bigger, stronger, and better armed than she was. She used mining equipment, construction tools, even the colony's own infrastructure against us. Zektar's voice was barely audible. How is that possible? Because we fought by the rules, Veltar said simply. And humans don't know what rules are. Veltar stared into the depths of his drink, watching the blue liquid swirl like a miniature storm. The cantina noise faded into background whispers. As he pulled himself deeper into memories that still haunted his sleep. After 3 days of hunting ghosts in that colony, our commander finally located the main human force, he said, his voice carrying the weight of old pain. They had retreated to Mining Station Bait 9, their primary extraction facility. It was built into the side of a mountain, all reinforced steel and industrial machinery. He lifted his scarred head to look at the recruits. Command was furious by then. We'd lost over 60 warriors to what they called a handful of primitive miners. The general himself came down from the flagship to oversee the final assault. Zektar shifted in his seat. Surely with your full force it should have been easy. Veltar's mandibles clicked slowly. 300 of the finest Nexorian warriors against 47 humans. Those were the numbers our intelligence gave us. Simple math, right? We had plasma cannons, heavy assault armor, military-grade shields. They had mining tools and determination. The veteran poured another drink, his movements deliberate and measured. The station itself was impressive. I'll give them that. Built like a fortress with multiple levels carved directly into the mountain rock. But it was designed for mining, not warfare. No military-grade defenses, no weapon emplacements, no shield generators, just thick walls and industrial equipment. Took a sip and continued. Our assault began at dawn. We surrounded the station completely, cutting off all escape routes. Then we opened communications to demand their surrender. Veltares remaining, I grew distant, seeing not the cantina, but a massive industrial complex built into red mountain stone. That's when I first heard Hyan Wu's voice. The human commander spoke to us over their main communication array. His voice was calm, almost conversational. No fear, no anger, just simple certainty. The veteran's voice dropped to match that long-ago memory. You want our home? Hyan Wu had said, come and take it. Simple words, Veltar continued, but something about the way he said them made my scales crawl. There was no bravado, no desperate defiance. Just a statement of fact, like he was telling us the weather. Yexera leaned forward. What happened next? We attacked, Veltar said simply. Full frontal assault on the main entrance. Plasma cannons, breaching charges, the works. We blew through their outer doors like they were made of paper. First wave. Went in expecting to find terrified miners hiding behind makeshift barricades. His claws scraped against the table again. Instead, we found hell. The cantina had grown completely quiet now. Even the three-headed bartender had stopped pretending. Tuerkin was listening openly. The humans had turned their entire facility into a weapon, Veltar continued. Industrial drills mounted on mechanical arms became rotating spears that could punch through our armor. Excavation charges rigged as proximity mines turned every step into potential death. Conveyor belts became moving walls of razored metal. Paused, remembering. But the worst part was how they used the station's own structure against us. Every corridor was a maze, every room a trap. They'd weaken support beams so sections would collapse when we triggered hidden charges. They'd redirected the station's power grid to electrify metal surfaces we might touch. The lieutenant recruit swallowed hard. How long did it take to secure the facility? For months, Veltar said, letting the words hang in the air like a curse. 4 months of fighting for every room, every corridor, every maintenance shaft. And even when we thought we'd cleared a section, we'd wake up the next morning to find our sentries dead and the humans back in control. His voice grew quieter, more intense. They moved through their station like blood through veins. Maintenance. Tunnels, air ducts, service corridors we couldn't even fit through. While we held the main areas, they controlled everything else. They cut our communications, sabotaged our equipment, poisoned our water supplies. Veltar touched his scarred face. I lost half my squad in the first week. Good warriors, experienced fighters, reduced to nervous wrecks, jumping at shadows, because that's what the humans had become. Shadows that killed. He drained his glass and continued. Every night, they would retake positions we'd secured during the day. Every morning, we'd find new traps, new defenses, new ways to die. It was like fighting the station itself, as if the very walls had come alive and learned to hate us. Veterans remaining, I fixed on each recruit in turn. The breaking point came in the 4th month. We finally managed to breach their command center, the heart of the station. We'd lost over 200 warriors getting that far, but we thought it was over. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. The command center was a circular room carved from living rock, filled with monitoring equipment and control panels. And there, sitting calmly in the center chair, was Hyun-woo. Veltar's mandibles clicked softly. He wasn't hiding, wasn't running, just sitting there like he was waiting for old friends to visit. Around him lay the bodies of his remaining fighters, humans who had died defending that room to their last breath. But Hyun-woo himself was untouched, calm as still water. The veteran's voice carried an odd note of respect. He looked at us with these dark human eyes, and I swear he was actually smiling. Not the grin of madness or desperation, just peaceful satisfaction. "Welcome to our home," he said in perfect Nexorian, his hand resting on what looked like a simple control panel. Veltar met the eyes of each recruit. Then he pressed the button. Silence in the cantina was absolute. The explosion brought down 3 entire levels of the station, Veltar said quietly. Hyun-woo had rigged the whole command section with mining charges. Not just enough to kill himself, but enough to take the heart of the station and every warrior in it straight to hell. His claws dug into the table. 112 Nexorian soldiers died in that explosion, including our general, including most of my remaining squad. The mountain itself shook like it was dying. And that's when I learned the most important lesson about fighting humans. They don't just fight to win. They fight to make sure you remember the cost of fighting them at all. Dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried more weight than a shout. The recruits found themselves leaning closer, drawn into the gravity of his words, like ships falling toward a black hole. The smart move would have been to retreat, he said, his remaining eyes staring at something beyond the cantina walls. After losing the mining station and half our forces, any reasonable enemy would have run, would have regrouped, called for reinforcements, lived to fight another day. Paused, letting the silence build. But humans aren't reasonable. The veteran's claws traced patterns on the metal table, leaving thin scratches in the surface. 3 days after the explosion, we were setting up our main base camp about 50 kilometers from the ruins. Zektar shifted uncomfortably. That sounds like standard procedure, it was Veltar agreed, which is exactly why it failed. The first sign of trouble came when supply convoy Delta 7 failed to report in. Standard supply run from the orbital platforms to our ground forces. They found the convoy 6 hours later. Every vehicle destroyed, every guard dead, every crate of supplies missing. But here's the strange part. The escorts weren't just killed. They were stripped of their armor, their weapons, even their identification tags. Yexara frowned. Why would humans want Nexorian equipment? The veteran's voice took on a storyteller's cadence, pulling his audience deeper into the memory. 2 days later, another supply convoy came under attack. He took a sip of his drink, savoring the moment. The attackers were moving in perfect Nexorian formation, using proper military tactics, even broadcasting the correct identification codes. To our sensors, they looked like a Nexorian patrol engaging enemy forces. The lieutenant recruit's eyes widened. The humans were impersonating your soldiers? Not just impersonating, Veltar corrected. They had become us. Full armor, perfect weapons discipline, even spoke our language without accent. If you saw them from a distance, you'd swear they were elite Nexorian commandos. The veteran's claws dug into the table. That's when I first heard the name Tajin. But the way they said that name, it carried weight, respect, fear. He lifted his head to look at the recruits. Tajin wasn't just a soldier. He was something else entirely. A ghost that had learned to wear our faces. The cantina had grown completely silent around them. The attacks escalated, Veltar continued. Not just supply convoys, but communication relays, forward observation posts, even medical. His voice grew harder, more bitter. But the worst part wasn't the attacks themselves. It was how they made us afraid of each other. When any patrol could be human infiltrators, when any friendly voice on the radio could be a trap, trust becomes a luxury you can't afford. Veltar's remaining eye grew distant. I remember one night I almost shot my own sergeant because he approached our position using the wrong hand signals, only to discover it was one of our own forward bases that had been overrun and was being used as bait. The veteran paused, letting the weight of his words settle. That's psychological warfare at its finest. The humans didn't just fight our bodies, they fought our minds. He drained his glass and continued. The final assault came 3 weeks later, surrounded by 200 of our best elite guards. Sensor arrays, automated defenses, overlapping fields of fire. It should have been impregnable. Veltar's voice dropped. To a whisper, 5 humans walked through it like it was made of paper. The recruits stared at him in disbelief. 5 humans against 200 elite guards? I was there, Veltar said simply, part of the general's personal security detail. I saw it with my own eyes. His scarred face grew grim. They came during the shift change, when our sensors showed the most activity. Dressed in perfect replicas of our uniforms, carrying forged authorization codes, even mimicking the walking. Patterns of specific officers our guards knew personally. The veteran's claws scraped against the table like nails on a coffin. Tajin himself walked past 3 security checkpoints without being questioned. Not because the guards were careless, but because he had studied us so thoroughly that he moved like a Nexorian, thought like a Nexorian, even smelled like a Nexorian. Veltar touched his scarred face. When they finally revealed themselves, it was like watching death take physical form. Tajin moved through our command center like he could see the future. Every shot we fired missed by inches. Every strike we attempted met empty air. He flowed around our attacks like water around stones. The veteran's voice grew quiet, intense. I watched him cut through 20 elite guards without breaking stride. Not through superior strength or speed, but through perfect knowledge of how. We fought how we thought, how we reacted under pressure. He met each recruit's eyes in turn. When he reached General Zexhara, he could have killed him instantly. Should have killed him instantly instead. He paused. Veltar's remaining eye fixed on the lieutenant. Tajin looked directly at me. Not at the general, not at the other guards, but at me specifically. Like he knew exactly who I was. What? The veteran's voice carried the weight of a confession. He spoke in perfect Nexorian, every word carefully chosen. Tell your people, he said. We remember everything. Every friend you killed, every home you destroyed, every family you scattered to the stars. We remember it all. Veltar touched his scarred face again. Then he gave me this reminder, quick as lightning. The blade opened my face from forehead to jaw, missing my brain by millimeters. Not a killing blow, a message. Ut! Too barely audible. Before I could even scream, smoke grenades exploded throughout the command center. By the time the air cleared, all 5 humans had vanished like ghosts. But they left behind something more valuable than any victory. The veteran looked at each recruit in turn. They left behind fear. Real bone-deep terror of an enemy that could be anyone, anywhere, anytime. An enemy that studied us, learned from us, and used our own strengths against us. He stood slowly, his multiple arms creaking with old injuries. That's when I learned the most important lesson about fighting humans. They make the very concept of opposing them so terrifying that surrender becomes the only rational choice. The cantina remained silent, as Veltar gathered his bottle and prepared to leave, and the truly frightening part, he added, his scarred face grim. We never did figure out how they escaped that compound. The cantina had transformed around them without anyone noticing. What started as background noise from dozens of conversations had gradually faded to whispers, then to complete silence. Soldiers from across the galaxy, Centaurian mercenaries, vegan traders, even a few Andromedan peacekeepers had abandoned their own tables to gather within earshot of the scarred veteran's tale. Veltar seemed unaware of his expanded audience. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried the weight of empires falling. The war didn't end with a great battle, he said quietly. No final heroic charge, no climactic space engagement, no dramatic surrender ceremony. It ended with a conversation in a sterile conference room aboard diplomatic station Zeta Prime. He set down his glass with deliberate care, the small sound. High Command had been getting nervous for weeks. Our casualty reports were ... unprecedented. Not just the numbers, but the nature of them. Entire units vanishing without trace. Supply lines disrupted across 3 star systems. Command posts going dark with no explanation. Zekdar's voice was barely a whisper. How many did you lose? 60% casualties across all fronts, Veltar replied, the numbers falling like stones into still water. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that we couldn't explain how. Our technology was superior, our numbers were overwhelming, our training was extensive. By every metric that mattered, we should have been winning. The veteran's mandibles clicked softly. That's when the humans sent their diplomatic message. It's not through normal channels, not through intermediaries or neutral parties. They broadcast directly to our high command using our own military frequencies, our own encryption codes, our own internal communication protocols. A chill ran through the assembled listeners. The implications were staggering. The message was simple, Veltar continued. 3 human diplomats would arrive at Zeta Prime in 72 hours for peace negotiations. No escort, no security detail, no weapons beyond personal sidearms. They requested a single conference room and promised to end the war in one conversation. He paused, letting the weight of memory settle. Our admirals laughed. 3 humans, coming to surrender to the entire Nexorian High Command, seemed like the perfect ending to an embarrassing campaign. Veltar's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. The humans arrived exactly on schedule. Their ship was small, civilian-grade, completely unarmed. It docked at Zeta Prime like a merchant vessel visiting a trade station. Da. Veteran's voice took on an odd note of respect. But when the airlock opened, what stepped out wasn't what anyone expected. He leaned forward, drawing his audience deeper into the memory. 3 humans in full military dress uniforms. Not ceremonial outfits or diplomatic robes, but actual combat gear. Battle-scarred armor, field-worn weapons, the kind of equipment that spoke of recent use. Veltar's remaining eye grew distant. The lead negotiator was a human female named Jihai. Couldn't have been more than 5.5 feet tall, maybe 120 pounds. But the way she moved, the way she carried herself, even our admirals fell silent when she entered the room. The cantina's air seemed to grow thicker, charged with anticipation. She didn't sit down immediately, Veltar continued. Instead, she walked around the conference table, studying each of our commanders like she was memorizing their faces. When she finally took her seat, she placed a small data pad on the table and folded her hands over it. Barely audible, Admiral Korthulin tried to take control of the negotiations. He started with the standard diplomatic opening. Something about discussing terms of human surrender and territorial concessions. Veltar's mandibles clicked once, sharp as breaking glass. Jihai let him finish his entire speech, never interrupted. Never showed any emotion, just sat there listening with perfect patience. When he was done, she leaned forward slightly and spoke exactly one sentence. The silence in the cantina was absolute. Even the station's background hum seemed to pause. "We have located your homeworlds," Veltar repeated, his voice carrying the exact inflection of that long-ago moment. That was all, 7 words. No elaboration, no explanation, no threats or demands, just a simple statement of fact. The recruit swallowed hard. What did that mean? Veltar's scarred face grew grim. It meant that while we were fighting their mining colonies and frontier settlements, they had been busy mapping our entire civilization, every planet, every space station, every military installation, every population center across 12 star systems. The veteran's claws traced patterns on the table. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was the data pad she'd placed on the table. Without saying another word, she activated it and projected a holographic display into the center of the room. His voice grew quieter, more intense. What we saw was impossible. Detailed schematics of Nexorian Prime, our capital world. Not just surface maps, but underground installations, military bunkers, even the High Command's private residential districts. Information that should have been classified beyond the highest security levels. Veltar met each listener's eyes in turn, then the display changed. Nexorian military installations across 3 sectors. Defense platforms that were supposed to be invisible to enemy sensors. Fleet positions that were updated daily. Even personal files on individual commanders, including their families, their homes, their daily routines. The veterans remaining. I burned with remembered shock. Jihai sat perfectly still while our admirals stared at the display in growing horror. Finally, Admiral Corthulin found his voice. "How did you obtain this information?" he demanded. Veltar's mandibles clicked. Softly, Jihai smiled. Not the cruel grin of a conqueror, but the patient expression of a teacher explaining something obvious to a slow student. "The same way we've been fighting this war," she said. "We studied you." The cantina's silence seemed to deepen impossibly. "That's when our commanders understood," Veltar continued. "Every battle we'd fought, every tactic we'd used, every strategy we'd employed, the humans had been learning from all of it. They'd turned our own strengths into intelligence gathering, opportunities." His voice carried the weight of revelation. While we saw mining colonies and frontier settlements, they saw research laboratories. Every engagement had been an experiment. Every casualty a data point, every victory a lesson in Nexorian psychology and military doctrine. Veltar stood slowly, his multiple arms creaking with old injuries. Admiral Corthulin asked the question we were all thinking. "What do you want?" he said. The veteran's scarred face grew solemn. Jihai deactivated the holographic display and looked at each of our commanders in turn. "We want you to go home," she said. "We want you to tell your people what you learned here. And we want you to make sure this conversation never needs to happen again." He gathered his empty bottle and prepared to leave. The entire Nexorian fleet withdrew from human space within 48 hours. Not because we were beaten in battle, but because we finally understood what we were really fighting. Veltar looked at the assembled recruits, his remaining eye burning. "With hard-earned wisdom, you young ones think strength comes from armor and claws and superior technology. But humans taught me that the most terrifying weapon in the universe is an enemy who learns from every mistake, remembers every lesson, and refuses to accept defeat as anything other than education." He limped toward the cantina exit, his scarred form casting long shadows in the dim light. "You're being deployed to human space in 3 days," he said without turning around. "Remember this story. Remember it well, because the humans certainly will." At the exit, he paused and looked back one final time. "Underestimate them once, and you might survive to learn from the experience. Underestimate them twice." He shrugged, the gesture somehow carrying more weight than any threat. Well, there won't be a twice. The old veteran disappeared into the corridor beyond, his footsteps echoing until they faded into the station's ambient noise. Behind him, the cantina remained frozen in silence. Young soldiers who had entered that evening full of confidence and eager for glory now sat staring at their drinks, their minds wrestling with a truth they weren't sure they wanted to accept. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity waited, patient, watchful, and learning. Always learning, the recruits would carry Veltar's story with them to the human frontier. Some would remember his warnings and approach their deployment with appropriate caution. Others would dismiss his tale as the ramblings of a broken old soldier. Those who forgot would provide humanity with fresh lessons to study. Those who remembered might actually make it home. The end.